I didn't realize my wedding was already over while I was still sitting in the wedding planner's office, nodding politely at fabric swatches and lighting diagrams. The kind of place designed to make everything feel permanent. White walls, soft music, a glass pitcher of cucumber water sweating gently on the table, magazines about centerpieces stacked like promises. 3 months before the wedding, $40,000 already gone into deposits, the venue locked, guest list finalized, my dress in its final alterations. Everything was done. Everything was decided. Or so I thought. My fiancé's phone buzzed. I didn't hear the message. I felt it. The way his shoulders stiffened. The way his jaw locked for just a second too long. I watched him glance down at the screen, and it was like the air left his body. All the color drained from his face. His fingers tightened around the phone, knuckles whitening. He didn't look at me. "I need the bathroom," he said abruptly, already standing, grabbing his jacket. "Want me to come with you?" I asked, half smiling, instinctively trying to lighten whatever had just cracked open. No thanks, I'll be right back." He didn't walk out. He rushed. The door closed behind him, and the room shifted. The planner cleared her throat and continued talking about linen colors, but her voice sounded far away, like it was coming through water. I checked my watch. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. My phone buzzed in my lap. "Can't do this, I'm sorry." I stared at the screen, convinced I'd misread it. Read it again, and again. Each time, the words stayed exactly the same. My heart started pounding, hard, uneven. My hands felt cold. "What do you mean you can't do this?" I typed back. The typing indicator appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "I'm not ready for marriage. I need time. Please don't hate me." The planner stopped mid-sentence. "Is everything okay?" I didn't answer right away. I turned my phone toward her instead. She leaned in, read the screen, and her expression drained of professionalism entirely. "Oh," she said softly. Another message came through. "I'm sorry, I just can't marry you." Something in my chest snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a clean break, like a bone giving way under pressure it had carried too long. He didn't say we need to talk. He didn't say I'm scared. He said can't. Decision made, past tense. "He's not coming back," I said quietly. The planner hesitated. "Maybe he just needs a few minutes. This happens sometimes." "He didn't text me from the bathroom," I said. "He left the building." Silence filled the room. I stood up slowly, every movement deliberate, like I was afraid sudden motion might shatter whatever composure I had left. "Cancel the wedding," I said. "All of it." The planner blinked. "I'm so sorry, but you've already paid nearly $40,000 in deposits. Most of it is non-refundable." "I know what I paid," I said. "Cancel it anyway." The next 3 hours passed in a blur of phone calls. The venue, 15,000 gone. The photographer, 2,000. The caterer, 5,000. Half refunded, mercifully. The florist, the DJ, the vintage car company, the ice sculpture vendor. Yes, we had an ice sculpture vendor. Each call felt like cutting away another piece of a life that no longer existed. The planner kept trying to slow me down. "You don't have to do this today," she said gently. "He might come back. Cold feet are normal." "He didn't panic," I replied. "He left." By the time I walked out of that office, there was no wedding left to save. Just contracts. And consequences. We didn't start as some whirlwind romance that burned too fast. Ours unfolded quietly, slowly, the kind of relationship that felt stable enough to trust without question. I met him 3 years earlier through a mutual friend at a small dinner party. Nothing dramatic, no sparks flying across the room, just conversation that didn't feel forced. He asked thoughtful questions. He listened without interrupting. When I laughed, he smiled like he'd done something right. We started dating not long after. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into weekends. Weekends turned into routines that stitched themselves into my life so seamlessly I didn't notice when he became part of my definition of home. He was calm, reliable, grounded in a way that felt reassuring. After years of dating men who mistook chaos for passion, his steadiness felt like safety. He didn't play games, didn't disappear, didn't leave messages unanswered for hours to assert dominance. When he said he'd be somewhere, he showed up. I let myself relax. We moved in together after a year. My apartment, technically. I'd bought it long before we met, but it never felt like mine once he was there. His shoes by the door, his coffee mug on the counter, his laundry mixed with mine like it had always belonged. He never pushed, never rushed timelines. When friends asked about marriage, he'd shrug and say, "When it makes sense." And I loved that about him. Loved that he wasn't performative about commitment. Loved that he didn't make promises lightly. So when he proposed, it felt earned. No grand spectacle, no crowd, just us. One quiet evening after dinner. He got down on one knee in the living room, hands slightly shaking, eyes locked on mine. "I don't want a perfect wedding," he said. "I want a solid marriage. With you." I said yes without hesitation. The ring was beautiful, but that wasn't the point. The point was how sure he sounded, how grounded he seemed. Like this was the most deliberate decision of his life. We told our families. My parents were cautious but supportive. His family, enthusiastic might be generous. His mother smiled tightly. His father asked logistical questions. Guest counts, venues, costs. It was clear early on that this wedding wasn't just about us. It was an event, a performance, a milestone they wanted handled correctly. He reassured me. "They'll come around," he said. "They just need time." So I gave them time. Wedding planning took over our lives. He insisted on handling most of the vendor communication himself. Said he was better with details, spreadsheets, contracts. I didn't mind. I trusted him. I focused on my work, my responsibilities, believing we were dividing labor like adults. We talked about the future often. Where we'd live next, whether we'd renovate or move. Kids. Someday, not yet. Careers. Travel plans for the honeymoon. Italy, maybe. Somewhere warm and slow. The night before the planner meeting, we had dinner like always. Nothing felt off. He laughed at my story about a coworker, reached across the table to squeeze my hand, kissed my forehead before bed. I remember lying there, listening to his breathing, thinking, this is it. This is the life. I didn't know that while I was planning a wedding, he had already started planning an exit. I didn't know there was another conversation happening, one I wasn't part of. And I didn't know that everything I believed was secure was already unraveling. The first warning signs didn't arrive like alarms. They slipped in quietly, dressed as stress. Logistics. Normal pre-wedding pressure, the kind everyone told me to expect. He started spending more time on his phone. Not obsessively, not in a way that screamed secrecy, just frequently. A glance during dinner, a quick reply while brushing his teeth. A screen tilted slightly away from me, not hidden, but not shared either. When I asked, he smiled. "Vendors," he said. "Everyone wants something at the same time." That made sense. I nodded. I didn't want to be the woman who interrogated her fiancé over notifications. Still, something shifted. He became distracted in conversations. I'd be halfway through a sentence and realize he wasn't fully there. His responses came a second too late, like he was translating his thoughts back into the room. One night, I mentioned honeymoon ideas again. Italy, Greece, somewhere with water and slow mornings. "Yeah," he said, eyes still on his phone. "That could be nice." Could be. The word landed wrong. I brushed it off. Then came the changes in tone. Subtle, almost unnoticeable, unless you were living inside them. He stopped using we as much. Instead of when we move, it became if we decide. Instead of our place, it became your apartment, said casually, like it had always been that way. When I pointed it out, he laughed. "You're overthinking." So I told myself I was. His family, on the other hand, grew louder. His mother started calling more often, not to ask how I was, but to check on timelines, guest list size, seating arrangements, whether the ceremony would be formal enough. Once, over dinner, she smiled at me and said, "Marriage is a serious commitment. It's good to be sure." I smiled back. "We are." She glanced at her son. He didn't meet my eyes. That night, I asked him if something was wrong. "No," he said immediately. "Too fast." "Why would you think that?" "I don't know," I admitted. "You just feel distant." He sighed, rubbed his face. "It's just stress. Big life changes do that." I accepted that explanation because I wanted to. Then there were the absences. Late meetings that ran longer than expected. Errands that didn't quite add up. One evening, he came home smelling unfamiliar. Not perfume, not alcohol, just different. Like a place I didn't recognize. "Where were you?" I asked. "Out," he said, thinking. Thinking about what? I didn't ask. I didn't want to push. I trusted him. The truth is, I didn't suspect another person. Not consciously. He'd told me enough stories about his past relationship, how toxic it was, how relieved he was when it ended. He'd sworn he was done with that chapter. So when his mood shifted after certain phone calls, quiet, withdrawn, restless, I told myself it was pressure, fear, cold feet that everyone said were normal. Even the way he avoided looking at me some nights, choosing sleep over conversation, felt like something temporary, fixable. What I didn't realize was that he wasn't pulling away from marriage. He was pulling away from me. And while I was trying to reassure us both that everything was fine, he was already standing halfway out the door, waiting for something or someone to pull him the rest of the way. I don't remember the drive home. I know I got in the car. I know I followed familiar streets. But my body did it on autopilot, like my mind had stepped out to deal with something else entirely. By the time I unlocked the door to the apartment, my hands were steady in a way that scared me more than shaking would have. Inside, everything looked exactly the same. His shoes by the door, his jacket slung over the chair, the faint smell of his cologne still hanging in the air. Our life paused mid-sentence. He wasn't there. I stood in the doorway for a long moment listening. Nothing. No movement, no familiar sounds, just quiet so thick it pressed against my ears. I called his phone. Straight to voicemail. "Hey," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "It's me. Where are you? We need to talk." I hung up and stared at the screen, willing it to light up again. "Nothing," I texted. "At least tell me you're safe. Read receipt." No response. That was when the cold started creeping in. I walked through the apartment slowly, like I was moving through a museum exhibit of a life that had already ended. His clothes still filled the closet, shirts folded neatly, suits hanging untouched. The bathroom counter crowded with his things. Toothbrush, razor, products he'd insisted were essential. All of it still here. Just not him. I called his sister next. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight, controlled. "Hey," I said, "where is he?" A pause. "Who?" she asked. "Don't," I said. "Please don't do that. Where is my fiancé?" Another pause, longer this time. "I really think you should talk to him about—" "He won't answer," I said. "He left our wedding planning meeting and broke up with me by text." "Where is he?" Silence. "I don't know," she said finally. "You're lying." "I have to go," she replied quickly. The line went dead. I sat down hard on the couch, my phone still pressed to my ear long after the call ended. My chest felt tight, like something heavy was sitting on it. 3 years. We'd been together for 3 years. Engaged for 1. We'd had dinner the night before, talked about honeymoon plans, laughed at something stupid on TV. He'd kissed me goodnight, like nothing was wrong. What changes in 12 hours? I didn't get an answer that night. I barely slept. Every sound made my heart jump. Every car outside made me think it was him, coming back to explain everything. Morning came anyway. At exactly 7 a.m., my phone rang. His sister again. She was crying this time. "I just found out," she said, breath hitching. "I'm so sorry." "Found out what?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. She took a shaky breath. "He's with him, his ex." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my body didn't know what else to do. "You're joking," I said. "I wish I was." Apparently, they'd been talking for months. He'd told my fiancé, no, my ex, that his marriage was ending. That he'd made a mistake letting her go. That he'd never really moved on. She'd been waiting. Waiting while planning a wedding with me. Waiting while wearing my ring. Waiting while promising me a future. "The divorce was finalized last week," his sister continued. "As soon as it was official, he left." I leaned against the kitchen counter, my legs suddenly weak. "She told our mom this morning," she added quietly. "Said she made a mistake getting engaged to you. That she never got closure. That she needs to see if things can work with him." Every memory replayed itself in a new light. Every late night. Every distracted glance. Every reassurance that meant nothing. "Thanks for telling me," I said finally. "I appreciate it." "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "There's nothing you can do," I replied. When I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. Then I sent one last message to his number. "I hope it works out with your ex." And I blocked him. Everywhere. Instagram, email, everything. I didn't cry. Not yet. I opened my notes app and started making a list. Because if he was gone, then the only thing left to do was clean up the wreckage. The calls started 72 hours later. At first, I didn't recognize the number. Unknown caller. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. By the 4th time, curiosity won. "Oh my God, finally," he said the moment I answered. His voice was frantic, breathless. "We need to talk, right now." "We really don't," I replied, already feeling my spine straighten. "Yes, we do. The wedding vendors are calling me nonstop." I closed my eyes for a second, let the silence stretch. "That's how cancellations work," I said calmly. "You need to help me with this." "No," I said. A sharp inhale. "You can't be serious?" "You left me," I said. What was I supposed to do? Keep a wedding venue booked for a wedding that doesn't exist? You should have waited, he snapped. We could have talked. You broke up with me by text and disappeared, I said. There was nothing to wait for. The venue wants 15,000, he said quickly. The photographer wants 2, the caterer. I know exactly what they want, I interrupted, because I was the one paying. There it was. The shift, the entitlement creeping in. You signed the contracts, I said. You handled the planning. Congratulations. You're now handling the consequences. I can't afford this, he said, voice cracking. You have to help me. Then ask your ex, I replied. Silence. He says it's not his problem, he muttered. I laughed once. Short, sharp. Sounds like you're dating a real winner again. You're being cruel. No, I said. I'm being accurate. I hung up. Immediately, another call came in. Different number. Him again. I blocked it. Another call. Blocked. Another. Blocked. This went on for nearly an hour. His friends' phones, random numbers, voicemails stacking up like accusations. I turned my phone off. When I turned it back on later, there were 38 missed calls. I listened to one voicemail. You're ruining my life, his voice said, raw and shaking. These vendors won't stop calling. I can't afford this. We were supposed to get married. You have to help me. I deleted it. All of them. His sister texted next. Please call him back. He's having a breakdown. Not my problem anymore, I replied. The bills are insane. He can't pay them. He should have thought about that before abandoning our relationship. You're being cruel. I'm being honest. I blocked her too. A mutual friend filled in the gaps a few days later, quietly, apologetically. Apparently, my ex had been in contact with his ex-boyfriend for 6 months. 6 months. He'd been telling him his marriage was over, that he'd made a mistake not choosing him, that he wanted another chance. The second the divorce finalized, that text hit his phone in the planner's office. It's official. He left me for him. Expected to move right in. Except, plot twist, the newly divorced ex was living in a tiny studio, drowning in alimony payments, and very much not ready to play house. Slow down, he'd said. So my ex bounced between friends' couches, waiting for him to be ready, while vendor after vendor started calling. Because every contract, every cancellation fee, was under his name. His email, his phone number. At the time, it made sense. He wanted control, wanted to be the main contact. I'd just been the one paying. Now, every bill landed squarely on his doorstep, and he was panicking. He taught yoga part-time, made barely $30,000 a year. He'd lived with me rent-free. I'd covered groceries, utilities, travel, most of our life together. His savings weren't even close, and his ex wasn't helping. According to my friend, my ex had expected him to pay for the failed wedding. The entitlement was almost impressive. A week later, his mother showed up at my apartment. She rang the doorbell over and over, like volume could force forgiveness. I answered through the Ring camera. What? I asked. We need to talk about this situation, she said sharply. No, we don't. Those vendor bills should be split 50-50, she insisted. You were both getting married. I was getting married, I said. He was killing time until his ex became available. He made a mistake, and now he's paying for it. That's not fair, she snapped. You're right, I said. Life isn't. You canceled everything. After he left me, his credit will be ruined. Then he should pay the bills. With what money? Not my problem to solve. She stood outside yelling for 20 minutes, called me heartless, vindictive, said a real woman would help her ex. I told her I'd call the police for trespassing. She left screaming about lawyers. A few days later, a letter arrived from one, demanding I pay half of the cancellation fees. I took it to my lawyer. He read it once and laughed out loud. This is nonsense, he said. You're fine. And for the first time since the planner's office, I felt something close to solid ground beneath my feet. The quiet after that felt heavier than the chaos. No more calls. No more unknown numbers lighting up my phone. Just long stretches of silence that pressed in from every corner of the apartment. Silence has a way of replaying things you're not ready to hear yet. I kept expecting him to come back for his things. Every time the elevator dinged, every time keys rattled somewhere in the hallway, my body reacted before my mind did, heart jumping, breath catching, only to settle again into disappointment. He never showed. Days passed, then a week. His clothes stayed in the closet. His mug stayed in the sink. The life we'd built together existed in fragments, like evidence after a crime. I didn't touch any of it. Not because I wanted him back, but because touching it felt like admitting something was permanently gone. That was when the doubt crept in. Late at night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, the questions started circling. Did I overreact? Should I have waited? Was I too cold? Everyone always talks about being the bigger person, about forgiveness, about grace, about how love means helping even when you're hurt. I replayed the planner's words in my head. Cold feet are normal. What if I'd canceled too fast? What if he'd come back? What if this could have been salvaged? The thoughts gnawed at me until my chest felt tight, until my hands started shaking for no clear reason, until the memory of that text, "Can't do this. Sorry," blurred and softened in my mind, like time was trying to edit it into something less cruel. That scared me, because the facts hadn't changed. He didn't ask for space. He didn't ask for a conversation. He left. And still, I felt myself slipping into guilt for protecting myself. The financial reality hit next. Even though legally I was clear, the numbers sat in my head like a low hum. $10,000 gone. Just gone. Money I'd worked for, planned with, set aside for a future that no longer existed. I caught myself calculating what I could have done with it. Trips, savings, a cushion. Instead, it had evaporated into cancellation fees and silence. Therapy started shortly after. I went in thinking we'd talk about heartbreak. Instead, we talked about betrayal, about how being blindsided doesn't always look dramatic, how sometimes it looks like someone smiling at you over dinner while quietly planning an exit. My therapist asked a question that stuck with me. Why do you think you feel responsible for the consequences of his choices? I didn't have an answer. I'd spent so long being the stable one, the understanding one, the one who didn't make things harder. Somewhere along the way, I'd learned to absorb discomfort so other people didn't have to. That pattern was hard to unlearn. Then the pressure came back, louder this time. Mutual friends started reaching out again. Carefully worded messages, concerned tones. He's really struggling. He's not himself. He made a mistake. I stared at one message for a long time before replying. Mistakes are accidents, I typed. This was a decision. Some friends didn't like that answer. A few quietly drifted away after that. Stopped texting. Stopped inviting me places. They'd chosen a side, one shaped by his version of the story, where he was overwhelmed and scared, and I was cold and unforgiving. It hurt more than I expected. Loss stacked on top of loss. I questioned myself again. But then, reality had a way of interrupting the spiral. Another letter arrived. This one wasn't from a lawyer. It was from him. Handwritten, 3 pages. He wrote about regret, about confusion, about how his ex had manipulated him, promised him a future, made him believe he was choosing the right path. How when the divorce finalized and he left me, the fantasy lasted barely a week. Reality hit fast. Alimony, a cramped apartment, emotional exhaustion. His ex wasn't ready for a serious relationship, especially not one with drama attached. So he left him, blocked him, and now my ex was alone, drowning in bills, credit wrecked, family furious, friends exhausted. He wrote that he was sorry, that leaving me was the biggest mistake of his life, that he'd had a breakdown, that he'd never stopped loving me. And then, inevitably, he asked, could I please help with the vendor bills? He promised he'd pay me back. He just needed help. I read the letter twice. My hands were steady this time. I wrote back one sentence. You made your choice. Live with it. I didn't sign it. I sent it back. That was the lowest point, not because I doubted myself anymore, but because I finally understood something painful. Loving someone doesn't obligate you to save them from the consequences of betraying you. And choosing yourself can feel lonelier than choosing forgiveness. Something shifted after I sent that letter. Not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, like a weight I'd been carrying finally setting itself down. The calls stopped after that. No more unknown numbers. No more messages relayed through friends. No more emotional appeals dressed up as concern. It was as if my refusal had closed a door everyone assumed I'd eventually reopen. And for the first time since the planner's office, I could breathe without bracing for impact. The clarity didn't come from anger anymore. It came from understanding. I started seeing the entire timeline clearly, not through the fog of heartbreak, but with distance. 6 months of emotional cheating. 6 months of keeping me steady while he waited for someone else to become available. 6 months of planning a wedding he already knew he wasn't going to attend. That wasn't panic. That wasn't confusion. That was strategy. And once I named it, the guilt lost its grip. I met with my lawyer again, not because I needed to, but because I wanted certainty, finality. He walked me through everything one more time, the contracts, the responsibilities, the lack of obligation on my end. You didn't abandon him, he said plainly. He abandoned the relationship. The law reflects that. I walked out of that office feeling taller than when I'd walked in. Back at home, I finally started reclaiming my space. I boxed up his things carefully, not angrily, not dramatically, just methodically. Shirts folded, shoes paired, personal items sorted, evidence of 3 years reduced to labeled cardboard. I didn't rush it. Each item I touched carried a memory, but the memories no longer cut the way they used to. They felt resolved. Finished chapters, not open wounds. When I dropped the boxes off with his sister, I didn't wait. I didn't ask how he was doing. I didn't look for updates. I left. That was power. The last attempt came unexpectedly. A mutual friend, one I trusted, asked to meet for coffee. I agreed, cautious but open. "He's not okay," she said gently after a while. "He's really hit bottom." "I believe that," I replied. "He says he realizes now that he sabotaged the best thing in his life." I didn't respond. "He wants to apologize, properly, in person." There it was. The moment everyone seemed to think would undo everything. I stirred my coffee slowly, watched the cream swirl and disappear. "What would that change?" I asked. She hesitated. "I don't know. Closure?" "I already have closure," I said. "I got it when he left." She studied me for a long moment. "You've changed." "I had to," I replied. She nodded, didn't argue, didn't push. That was the last time his name came up in my presence. A few weeks later, I heard the rest through the background noise of mutual connections. He filed for bankruptcy, let the vendor bills go to collections. His credit dropped hard. He couldn't rent an apartment on his own. Ended up renting a room from a stranger. His ex moved across the country, got engaged not long after. A clean slate, one my ex didn't get to share. When he found out, apparently something in him cracked. That knowledge didn't feel like victory. It felt like confirmation. Confirmation that I hadn't misread anything, that leaving me hadn't been about readiness or fear. It had been about chasing a fantasy that evaporated the moment real life showed up. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fix anything. I focused on myself instead. Therapy deepened. The work got harder, but also more honest. I learned how easily I'd ignored red flags in favor of stability, how often I'd mistaken consistency for loyalty. I learned that love without respect is just obligation wearing a softer face. The apartment felt different now, lighter, quieter in a way that felt intentional, not hollow. One night, sitting alone on the couch, I realized something else. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for an apology. Not for justice. Not for him to hit some emotional milestone that would make everything make sense. I had my answer, and with it came something I hadn't expected at all. Peace. The aftermath didn't arrive all at once. It trickled in through other people, half updates, overheard conversations, details I never asked for, but somehow kept finding me anyway. He didn't disappear quietly. The bankruptcy was real. The vendor bills followed him like shadows. Collections notices, calls, letters stamped with red warnings. His credit collapsed fast. 200 points gone in weeks. Apartments rejected him before he even finished applications. At first, he tried to frame it as temporary. Just a reset, he told mutual friends. I'll rebuild. But rebuilding requires stability, and he didn't have any. The room he rented was small, barely furnished. A mattress on the floor, a desk that wobbled. No space for guests, not that he had many left. Teaching yoga part-time wasn't enough to keep up with minimum payments, let alone alimony obligations that didn't pause just because his life had imploded. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who knew the full story. He'd left a stable future, home, partnership, financial security, for a promise that evaporated in a week. His family didn't soften with time. If anything, they hardened. His mother stopped defending him publicly. She told relatives he'd been confused, then misled, then finally reckless. His father stopped calling me after one final voicemail, accusing me of ruining his son's life. I never responded. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said. The legal threat disappeared as quickly as it arrived. One letter from my lawyer shut it down completely. No countersuit, no follow-up, just silence. That silence said everything. Mutual friends sorted themselves into categories I hadn't realized existed. Some apologized, quietly, awkwardly, for believing his version. Others never reached out again. I stopped wondering which group mattered more. Quality over quantity stopped being a saying and became a rule. Then came the engagement announcement. His ex, that ex, posted photos online. New ring, new city, new life. The caption was something bland about choosing happiness. Someone sent it to me, maybe expecting a reaction. I felt nothing. Later, I heard that when my ex found out, he spiraled. Not loudly, not publicly, just inward. Missed classes, stopped returning messages, retreated further into himself. He'd chased the idea of being chosen again, only to be reminded that he was always a detour, never a destination. That wasn't karma. That was cause and effect. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't feel smug. I didn't feel vindicated in the cinematic way people expect. I felt done. Done absorbing consequences that weren't mine. Done being cast as the villain in a story that started with betrayal. Done measuring my morality by how much damage I was willing to endure for someone who'd already walked away. The money I lost still stung. $10,000 doesn't vanish quietly, but every time the thought surfaced, you could have helped him. Another truth followed right behind it. Helping him would have meant erasing the lesson he refused to learn. It would have meant confirming that I was still his safety net. And I wasn't. The final ripple came months later, through a friend who'd stayed neutral the whole time. He still talks about you, she said carefully, about how he ruined everything. I believe that, I replied. He says you were the best thing that ever happened to him. That may be true, I said, but it doesn't change what he chose. She nodded, didn't argue. That was the difference now. No one was asking me to bend anymore. No one was telling me to be understanding. No one was confusing forgiveness with financial rescue. The fallout settled where it belonged. On him. And when it did, the strangest thing happened. My life didn't shrink around the absence. It expanded. Almost a year passed before I realized I wasn't telling the story anymore. Not to friends, not in therapy, not even to myself in those quiet moments before sleep. It had stopped being the headline of my life and become something smaller, background context, a chapter, not the plot. The first few months after everything fell apart were rough. Grief doesn't care that you made the right decision. It shows up anyway. Anger and sadness took turns. Some days I missed him. Other days I missed the version of myself who thought love automatically meant safety. Therapy helped. Not in the cinematic way people expect, where one breakthrough fixes everything. It helped slowly, by teaching me to trust my instincts again, by naming the red flags I'd dismissed as stress, by reminding me that betrayal doesn't always come with shouting. It often comes quietly, with planning. The money still hurt. Losing $10,000 wasn't nothing. But every time I thought about what could have been worse, the answer came easily. I could have married him. I could have built a legal life with someone who was already halfway gone. Someone capable of smiling at me over dinner while waiting for another door to open. Instead, I lost money and gained clarity. The apartment stayed mine. That mattered more than I'd expected. It wasn't just about ownership. It was about grounding. About knowing I hadn't lost everything. I redecorated, rearranged, made the space reflect who I was now, not who I'd tried to be for someone else. Eventually, I sold the engagement ring. Not out of spite, not ceremonially, just practically. I got back a little over half of what he'd paid. I used that money to take a trip. Nothing extravagant, just space, distance, time to breathe without carrying someone else's expectations. I came back lighter. Dating again happened slowly, carefully. I didn't rush it. Trust, once cracked, takes time to rebuild, but I wasn't closed off. I was selective. And that felt like strength. Here's the lesson I learned the hard way. Being the bigger person doesn't mean becoming smaller, so someone else can avoid consequences. Forgiveness doesn't require self-erasure. And love doesn't obligate you to be a safety net for someone who planned to leave you. He didn't make a mistake. He made a choice. And when that choice didn't work out, he wanted me to absorb the fallout. I didn't. And that's why today, my life feels quiet in the best possible way. Boundaries intact, self-respect restored, and a future that finally belongs to me.